Welcome back to my channel. I'm Neil Chase, author of the horror novel Iron Dogs and writer-director of the supernatural thriller film Spin the Wheel. And what I want to talk about today is the bad guys. Every great story has a villain, but not every villain is great. Think about it. The best villains stay with us long after the story ends. So how do you create a villain that stands out from the crowd? Stick around, because today I'm sharing 5 essential tips to help you write a villain your readers will never forget. And be sure to check out my free villain character development workbook, which will help you create a unique villain of your own. You'll find the link in the description below. Villains are more than just obstacles for your hero. They're the mirror that reflects your story's themes, the force that drives conflict, and often the reason readers stay invested. We've all heard that famous saying, a hero is only as good as the villain. Well, the reason is because a great villain challenges your hero, surprises your audience, and leaves a lasting impact. In this video, I'll walk you through 5 proven tips to create a standout villain, including how to give them relatable motivations, make them multidimensional, and craft backstories that rival your heroes. So grab your popcorn, let's get started. The best villains believe they're the hero of their own story. They're not just evil for the sake of it. They have clear, relatable motives for what they do. Take Killmonger from Black Panther. His actions are extreme, but his motivation, to right the wrongs of systemic oppression, is something we can understand. Or think of Thanos in Avengers Infinity War. He wants to save the universe from overpopulation, but rather than doubling the resources, he cuts the population in half. And this is what makes these characters villains instead of heroes. Their hearts might be in the right place as far as motivation goes, but their extreme and bloody methods make them the villains through and through. So here's your challenge. Ask yourself, what does my villain want? And why does it matter to them? How far will they go to reach this goal? And what will they sacrifice? If you can answer that in a way that feels grounded, you're on the right track. And that leads us to tip number 2. One-note villains are not just forgettable. These days, they're a dime a dozen. No real personality or stakes, just a character that's evil for the sake of being evil. Honestly, how many more shallow, greedy, rich guys do we need to see on screen? You know, the type that's already insanely wealthy and has everything their hearts could desire, but for some strange reason they want even more. And what's worse is that reason is typically never given, probably because the writers never even considered one. To make your villain stand out, add layers to their personality. Show their vulnerabilities, fears, or even moments of kindness. Do we really need to see yet another scene where the villain boss kills an underling for failing? It's such an overused trope that it instantly takes me out of the story. Think about it. If you were a henchman in need of a steady paycheck, would you work for a psycho whose first impulse is to kill you if you screw up in the smallest way? Hell no. But make that villain give second chances or a flash of sympathy, and they become a whole different character. A multi-dimensional villain isn't just intimidating. They're fascinating. Think about it. As utterly deranged as Hannibal Lecter is, he developed somewhat of a soft spot for Clarice Starling in The Silence of the Lambs. Not only does he help her with her case numerous times, but he goes out of his way to right certain wrongs made against her, in his own psychotic way. By showing this duality of character, he endears himself to the audience on one hand, while utterly repulsing them with his actions at other times. And Walter White from Breaking Bad? Well, he's a villain whose descent into darkness is both horrifying and deeply human. He begins the story as a hero, utterly sympathetic and relatable, who then turns into an anti-hero, willing to cross certain lines for a greater good, and then eventually into a villain, willing to do anything to stay on top. So here's what you can do. Write a scene where your villain reveals a crack in their armor, a moment of weakness, a fear, or even a kindness. Something that shows them to be less than perfect, and maybe even sympathetic. In other words, show their humanity. This will make them relatable and far more compelling to your audience. A memorable villain often has something instantly recognizable. A costume, a weapon, a specific sound, or even a behavior. But here's the secret. The most powerful traits or symbols are tied to their backstory. Take Freddy Krueger's glove, for example. It's not just a weapon. It's a direct tie to his history as a child killer, so much so that it becomes an extension of him in the dream world. Or Voldemort's snake-like features, which symbolize his obsession with immortality and his descent into a darkness devoid of humanity. Jason's hockey mask, Leatherface's chainsaw, Sauron's ring, Darth Vader's mechanical breathing. The list goes on and on. Sometimes even the lack of something can be tied to the villain. Think of how Michael Myers never utters a sound, even when he's badly injured. Not only is this tied to his own history, it serves to make him even creepier and more memorable. And why is this important? Well, your villain's backstory shapes who they are, just like your hero's does. A well-developed backstory gives their iconic traits meaning and makes them feel like a fully realized character. So ask yourself, what specific moments from their past defines who they are now? And how can you symbolize that history through a visual or behavioral trait? Maybe your villain carries a broken locket from someone who betrayed them, or they only attack on a specific date. Whatever it is, make it as personal as possible. Your villain should push the hero to their absolute limits. And honestly, even beyond that. They should expose your hero's fears, weaknesses, and internal flaws, and force them to make the toughest choices. Without this dynamic, your story loses its tension. But more than that, how can your hero live up to their full potential if they never have to face their biggest challenge? The Joker constantly tests Batman's moral code, forcing him to grapple with the line between justice and vengeance. Thulsa Doom takes everything from Conan each time they meet, breaking him down to nothing and forcing him to rebuild himself just to try again. Voldemort is not just powerful, he's also emotionally and physically tied to Harry, making their conflict as personal as it gets. So here's the key. Think about your hero's biggest fear or weakness. How does your villain exploit it in the most effective way possible? That's where the real tension lies. A villain who's constantly losing isn't intimidating. Think of Marvel's Kang, who in the course of his run in the MCU and despite being hailed as a conqueror greater than Thanos, loses every single time he faces off against whatever heroes he's up against. He loses to Loki, he loses to Janet Van Dyne, he loses to Ant-Man. Pretty soon you get the feeling this guy can't beat anybody. And there's the problem. If your hero can beat the villain without a second thought, it not only lowers the stakes and makes the conflict meaningless, but it tells the audience that you chose the wrong villain for the fight. So to make your villains truly menacing, let them win, even if it's only temporary. This raises the stakes for your hero and keeps your audience guessing. Or be bold and let the villain win outright. Think of the Rocky movies. My personal favorite is Rocky III, and a huge reason is that Clubber Lang outright beats Rocky, and it's not even close. Rocky won by a hair's breadth against Apollo, and he won convincingly against Ivan Drago and Tommy Gunn. But Clubber is the only Rocky villain to knock Rocky out, and in under 3 rounds no less. That's one hell of a challenge for our hero to try and overcome by fighting him again in the climax of the film. Or what about The Empire Strikes Back? Not only does Vader beat Luke, but the Empire wins as well, and the Rebel Alliance is left in utter disarray by the end of the film. This defeat makes the Rebels' eventual victory in Return of the Jedi all the more satisfying. Now think about your characters, and write a moment where your villain gets the upper hand. Maybe they destroy something your hero cares about, or force them into an impossible choice. Letting your villain win makes your story more unpredictable and your villain all the more formidable. So let's recap. To create a villain that stands out, give them relatable motivations, make them multidimensional, tie iconic traits to their backstory, ensure they challenge your hero, and don't be afraid to let them win. If you're interested in improving your villains, check out my free villain character development workbook, which will guide you through these and many other points you might not have thought of. You'll find the link in the description below. After all, a well-written villain doesn't just make your story better. They make it unforgettable. But hey, these are just my 2 cents. Give me yours. Let me know in the comments below what you think makes for an unforgettable villain, and why so many villains today don't seem to measure up to the villains of old. And if you'd like to support this channel and see more of my work, please click the links below to check out my horror novel Iron Dogs, available in ebook, print, and audiobook, or my latest film Spin the Wheel, out now on Tubi. As always, if you like what you saw, click that like button, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell to stay updated with the latest content. Until next time, stay creative.